There was a video by Shoddycast that I listened to that was asking the question, do the Raiders in Fallout have a soul? Now, the question, of course, was hypothetical. It wasn't meaning, does a video game character have a soul of its own? It was saying, basically, we're using Raiders as cannon fodder. When you sit down and think about it, Raiders are basically living in a very harsh world and they're just trying to survive. And unfortunately, due to the dire circumstances, what one must do to survive is not always ethical, to say the very least. And so it was asking the question of, well, okay then, if you actually took the time to get to know them as a person, what would happen then? And the entire argument was basically, whether it's a raider in Fallout, an orc in a Lord of the Rings game, or a Nazi in Nazi German Simulator 5087, the point of it is, we are very used to seeing faceless mooks used as nothing more than cannon fodder. And it's usually hand-waved by saying, well, they're the bad guy, they're evil, they are trying to set the orphanage on fire, or whatever excuse may be to go and justify on why you should not care whether or not these people go and get curb stomped in a one-sided battle. And so, the point that I was wanting to go and bring up was this here, that when it comes to having the characters portrayed in a certain way, it is very often a common tactic to dehumanize the opposition. They're not people. They're not human beings. They're not mother, father, daughters, aunts, uncles, second cousins removed. They're not people. They're essentially nothing more than a human-shaped obstacle that needs to be taken out of the picture by whatever means necessary, and by whatever means necessary, that of course means a bullet to the head. Well, the thing of it is, listening to the social justice warriors about dehumanization, that seems to be something they're very, very good at. You're not a person. You're not even human. You are a white straight male, which means you are the epitome of all that is wrong with this world. It's nothing that you did. It's just like being born German in Hitler's Rise. You're not human. You're not even a person. The fact that you were born in Germany means you're a vile, terrible human being who needs to be killed because, oh no, you must support Hitler. Even though that by the time Hitler was in power, only 10% of people actually even agreed with what the guy was doing. But the thing of it is, because of what Hitler was doing, the other 90 were basically silenced or forced into coercion. So it didn't really matter what the majority wanted. All that mattered was, what did the guy in charge want? And we saw similar stuff with Stalin, Lenin, Castro, the list goes on. And while I'm on the subject, what of how the Japanese were portrayed during the entire Nazi conflict? I mean, yeah, Japan was on the Axis side during the time. And what finally made the Japanese get out of being so warlike was basically having an atomic bomb dropped on them that scared them so bad that to this day, the Japanese doesn't want anything to do with the war as we know it per se. And that's all because of complete and utter assured victory. That's kind of what you had to do to keep other people from fighting. You have to crush them so badly that the entire thought of being in a similar circumstance doesn't even make any sense. This is why we had World War II. At the end of World War I, the people in charge, they were bubble wrapped from the consequences. And so what happened is, since they were safe and they were okay, and since Germany wasn't under fire as things went, that's why World War II managed to go and break out. And of course, we already know what happened at the end of World War II. The Nazis got curb stomped so badly that the idea of entering another war is never going to go and enter their head. Well, not necessarily ever, but it's going to be a long while. The point of it, though, is this here. No matter how you go and look at it, when you're in a war with someone, it is very easy to go and paint the enemy as someone else. They're not you. They're the other guy. They're on the other side of the playing field. They're the enemy. They're whatever. They don't really have a personality. They're just there as an obstacle. And so what's happening is, again, when we see this with the Arabs and the people from Palestine and what have you, and the reason for it is kind of obvious, because they're the ones strapping bombs to themselves and blowing themselves up in public. It's not really easy. No, seriously, sit down and say, oh, the people who went and crashed the plane into 9/11, they were completely justified. Try saying that and see what's going to happen. A social justice warrior and what have you will probably be saying this, but they're not going to be very well received. And I'll admit a lot of people are going to go and say, well, okay, yeah, but we're not treating all of them bad. I mean, some of us are, but not all of us are treating them as bad. We're trying to be inclusive, and I'm like, yes, I know that. And while that's kind of admirable in its own way, the thing of it still is, we're still fighting these guys. And guess what? As long as there's a fight going on, the stereotypes are going to remain. Because, again, whenever there's a conflict, we really dehumanize the other side. That's just instinct. That's something we do as part of self-preservation. However, again, when it comes to the SJWs again and the feminists, what's happening is this here. We're basically seeing the same thing going on. You're not a human being. Like I said, you're a white straight male. With the feminists, oh no, you're disagreeing with the feminists. You must hate all women. Because that's the only two positions that can exist is either you support women entirely or you hate all women. It's not like there's a shade of gray in between where you go and believe, yeah, I go and support women, but I don't support them being carte blanche to do whatever they want and them basically being treated like children when it comes to being an adult, showing responsibility, and what have you. But again, and same thing in just politics. Take a look how the Democrats go and portray the Republicans, or how the Republicans portray the Democrats. It's the exact same thing. They're on the other side of the playing field. They're not us. Therefore, it's okay to dehumanize them, lump them all together, and strip them of individuality. Well, okay. Well, here's what I'm getting at. Because we are actually sitting down and doing all these things, you really have to go and wonder if we are stripping people of their autonomy and we are stripping them of individuality, then really, what are we doing? Because the problem with a lot of these conflicts is that people just can't get along. I mean, no matter how you want to look at it, that's the bottom line. We're in these situations, we're in these wars and everything else because, no, we cannot all get along. And that's understandable to some degree, especially when you got one side who believes that women should have the right to be whatever, and the other side says, no, women are nothing more than wastes of flesh whose only purpose in existing is to go and bear children, and that's it. I mean, when you go and got a group of people who are basically going to lock a bunch of women inside of a burning building and then justify it by saying, well, none of them had their faces covered and we didn't want to be tempted, so it was better for them to be burnt alive than for them to be freed and rescued, freed and safe, and then tempt all the men. Personally, as degrading as that sounds for women, it also basically paints men in a not too positive light as well by saying, well, men are completely sex driven and all they are is walking dildos, and that's insulting for both parties. No one wins in this situation. But in stuff like that, that's understandable. And with the social justice warriors and the feminists being completely out of their mind, it's either you're with us or you're against us. There is no middle ground. And the sad part of it is, unlike the people we're fighting in the current war, there should be a middle ground, because when you listen to each side and all, whether you're a feminist or an MRA, or you're a social justice warrior, or you're just someone like me who wants people to be treated the same, to be equal, and not have all these special privileges, to do away with privilege entirely so that everyone is on a level playing field. The sad part is there is room for equal ground, but we're never going to achieve it because we're too busy painting the person in an unfavorable light. We're too busy saying, well, they're terrible human beings, and I'll admit, people who are against feminists and against social justice warriors, I'll admit they will do the same thing. So it's not just this side or that side, it's both. And for people who listen to my channel, some of you are wondering, well, how can you say this about a social justice warrior? Don't you hate him? And I'm like, yes, of course I do. That's because they're extremists. If they weren't extreme, I would actually support them if they were moderate. If they were moderate and actually down to earth and were basically the type of people who's saying, well, yeah, we go and realize that women have it hard, but so do men. We realize that blacks are being discriminated against, but then again, so are whites. We recognize that gays have a hard time in this society because of sexual orientation, but so do straights because, think about it, just being white, just being straight, just being gay, just being one of these are bad enough. But when you're all three, you're the incarnate of all evil. And it's kind of weird because, well, for one thing, if you're basically saying how I am born determines my character as a human being. And that don't make any sense. I mean, didn't people say this about blacks and all? They were like, oh, well, blacks they're not people. They're subhuman. It's okay to go and enslave them because we're not enslaving people. This was what they actually said at the time in defense of slavery when it was real popular back in the 1800s. And today we can sit and say, well, that's terrible. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But guess what? That was the line of thinking back then. And the argument was you were born as this, and therefore your race determined whether you were a human being or not. And you can sit and say, well, that's terrible. How can anyone do this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. How can a social justice warrior sit and say, oh, you're white, you're racist? Well, guess what? You're black, you must be a criminal then. What difference is there? You're still saying, because of this, you're this. And it's like, I might as well go and have people saying, well, since you got blue-green eyes, you must be this kind of a person, or because you go and have a beard, this means you must be one of those detestable neckbeard people who hates women. And that's kind of weird that someone would say that, because when a woman goes and has hairy armpits, that's considered to be a good thing in the feminist movement because she's breaking free of what society thinks a woman should be. But I can't have facial hair? Come on, enough with the hypocrisy. But anyway, the point of it is, no matter how things are done, we will dehumanize the other side because they are not us. If they are not us, it's okay to do it as far as we're concerned, whether it's right or wrong. Here's the thing of it. What is right and what is legal are two different things. For example, how blacks were treated during the 50s and 60s, that wasn't right, but it was legal to do it. That was the common thing. Same thing in Nazi Germany. What they did to the Jews wasn't right, but it was legal. Well, okay. So if you're going to sit and say, well, these people are something else, they're different from us, and because they're different from us, that makes it okay to attack them and do whatever else. Well, okay. Well, if you're going to do that to these people when it favors you, why would you be saying otherwise when someone's going to do the same thing to you? I mean, can I not go and sit and say, well, this person's a fem, this person's an SJW. They're insane, they're out of their mind. They have no perspective, they have no self-control. They're all bitter, hateful people who just want to go and hurt other people. They're not really human beings at all. They're just human-shaped blobs who want to go and make the entire world miserable, and all they want is what they think is right without considering what other people go and think is right. Yeah, I'm not kidding. This again, you can sit and say, well, you're painting everyone in a broad brush. And as my mother would say, well, yeah, you got to understand, though, generalizations are generally wrong. And like I said, I have not met every social justice warrior there is, but from what I'm seeing, from the people that earn that label, they're usually insane and out of their mind. And I think that's kind of a good thing, because being for human rights, whether it be race, gender, or sexual orientation, the point of it is, if you go and support these things and you're not doing it for everyone, then by definition you're a bigot. That's all there is to it. If you're going to say, well, we support equality for these people, but not for these, okay, you're a bigot. You're saying not everyone deserves to be treated equally. Not everyone deserves equality under the law. Well, okay, we need a double standard. We need to go and have, as the case is now and all, people want segregation. We want to go and have things broken off because, oh no, these people think different. They're the other guy. Please protect us from these evil, hurtful, demonic thoughts that that don't align with our philosophy. Okay, well, if you're going to go out of your way to go and say segregation is okay and double standards are okay and giving this group more privilege just because of how they were born is okay, are you not basically saying that such and such group of people don't count as human? Or someone who is a bigot or a hypocrite, how are you different from these people when you are basically espousing their ideas? Granted, it's on the other end of the spectrum, but you're still basically doing the exact same thing. That would be like saying, oh, well, I'm not a criminal because I'm not black. Being a criminal, that's being black plus whatever, and therefore, I'm free of it. Well, okay, that makes no sense, because you break the law, by definition, you're a criminal. Okay, then. So, how can you sit there and say, well, I can't be prejudiced, I can't be a racist, because to be a racist, you have to be white. Racism is nothing more than privilege plus power. Well, okay, I'm poor, don't got a lot of money, and so what kind of power do I have? What kind of privilege do I got? Okay, well, it don't matter, you're still white. Okay, well, if someone's poor, a poor black person, they're living on welfare and everything else, then by the same amount of logic, being a criminal only applies to them. And I can say this because I'm putting this all on someone else. This isn't me we're talking about. This is someone else we're talking about. It's not the same thing. It's not the same person. They're just the other guy, and that's why I can go and put all the negative, bad stuff on them, and then go and attribute all the positive, good stuff to me. Seriously, no matter how you go and dice it up, you're still stripping people away from being human. Both sides need to stop this. Both sides need to start seeing the other person as an actual thinking, breathing human being. When we start doing this, when both sides start doing this, we can go and end discrimination, we can end sexism, we can go and end homophobia, we can go and end all these social evils that have been created. However, as long as one side wants to do it and the other side wants to bank on it, because what's happened is people who are like the SJWs, they realize that when you hit that guilt button, money comes out, privilege comes out, prestige comes out, all kinds of stuff comes out that you want. So you keep hitting that guilt button over and over and over again until nothing comes out. Well, okay then. In a situation like this, like we're currently in, that's why it doesn't work. You want to go and end all this stuff you're talking about? Here's what you do. You quit attacking the other side. You quit raising a fist and start extending a hand. You go and try and help one another. You go and say, I disagree about this, but I do not think you're Hitler. I do, however, think we do have common ground, and rather than let's working on what's different, let's work on what we have that's the same. Let's go and do this. And once we go and reach this commonality, we can iron things out bit by bit as we go along. I know this is all a pipe dream. I know that no one is going to go and listen to this. I already know this ahead of time. But the thing of it is, guess what? What I'm saying may never happen, but it is the one thing that will actually service both people on different sides. And the sad part of it is seeing the other side as being human or having a valid point. That's sometimes the hardest thing you can do. And until we go and do that, we're going to be fighting. That's all there is to it. We're not ever going to go and get any ground because we don't see the other side as a human being. And this may sound a little weird, but guess what? There was actually a movie where it concentrated on a bunch of Germans in a submarine. And what happened was, throughout the entire movie, it concentrated on these Germans who were, of course, working for the Nazis. But what happened is, because we spent so much time with them, we started to feel sympathy towards them despite the fact they were the enemy. In fact, what happened is, all they were trying to do at the end of the movie was to just get home. And when they got close to being home, they were attacked and I think ultimately killed. And this was terrifying, horrifying. It was a very shocking thing to see. And I'm like, well, okay, but why do you care for these German soldiers? Aren't they just a bunch of faceless Nazis that you can just mow down? Well, no, they're not. You've gotten to know them as a human being, and they're no longer a faceless person. While they're supporting the wrong people, the idea of them being killed in such a fashion is really horrifying. And that's kind of the entire point. Yeah, I know that. But then again, here's the question I have to go and ask. When you go and see someone you've associated with on the other side and you feel sympathy for them, what made them so different? Just the fact that you got to know them a little better? Was that it? So if you can go and feel sympathy for someone that's basically a Nazi, then how can you sit and say, well, they're all like this? Because once you go and point out a few that you feel sympathy for, then that's no longer true. If you can go and point at a few MRAs or a few people who are anti-SJWs and say, well, they may not be entirely right, but they have a point. That they have a valid stance on what they're saying, and they do actually care. They're not just hateful human beings. Well, okay, if you can do that about a handful of people, then you've pretty much proven that, no, they're not all alike. They are different. And if these few are different, then how can you go and sit and say they're all like this? Is that not basically, again, being nothing more than some kind of bigot? So what I'm getting at, simply as possible, just go and try and treat the other people as you yourself would want to be treated. That's basically the entire idea behind the golden rule. You go and treat others good, and ideally, they treat you good. If you're going to treat people as horrible, how do you go and expect them to treat you? Treat each other as human beings, and let the rest take care of itself. That is, of course, a generalization, and that leaves a lot of stuff uncovered. However, it is a good first step. And frankly, as long as we get the ball moving, that's as good of a place as any to start.